Hello everyone, this is NC Lord, and after a long time, I'm going to be doing a Rant Box episode. I'm actually going to talk about the original Duelist of the Roses. This has been kind of a long time coming, but now I'm going to discuss it. I'm going to start from the beginning and say I obviously love Duelist of the Roses. It is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, PS2 games I ever played. When I first rented it from Blockbuster, I didn't know, judging by the box artwork as a child, I obviously didn't know that it was going to be a not normal Yu-Gi-Oh game. I thought it was normal. And until I started playing, and I'm like, wow, this is weird. And as a kid, I wasn't very good at Yu-Gi-Oh! As a child, especially. And playing the strange foreign gameplay felt odd. But eventually I did get used to it, and I was able to play Duelist of the Roses competently. Now, I'm gonna get into the details. I really loved the music of the game. It had a very classy feel for the theme it was setting. I thought the idea of Yu-Gi-Oh! In medieval Europe was a great idea. It still has a lot of potential. I mean, they could revisit the idea, and if done right, if written well, like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe, the universe of where all the continuity takes place, could have plenty of room for stuff that happens in Europe. I mean, look at the Millennium Spellbook. One of those many spells created the Millennium Items, the spell where they had to, like, kill almost 100 people and, use their corpses along with the gold and forge it in that. And that also brought back Zork, who was, like, a major source of evil. But the implication is that there's many types of magic. Hell, there could even be Japanese magic in the same universe as Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, they got all sorts of weird myths. There could be Greek magic. There could be more British, European magic. There's all sorts of possibilities that could exist in that universe that have been unexplored. Largely unexplored. I mean, GX kinda with the Shadow Charms, but those felt like Millennium Item knockoffs. I mean something more nuanced, like exploring the mythology of something entirely different. Because I consider the Millennium Items kinda exploring Egyptian mythology. So, exploring another culture and making the items match that theme would be very creative. It would be refreshing. But anyways, I really did like a lot of the ideas of the game. I liked the fact that your life points could be like a king, and it could be attacked directly if you don't move it. I liked the fact that you could change the terrain, and they had interesting boosts and stuff. I liked those ideas as separate entities. I thought a lot of the artwork and stuff in the game was amazing. Like the labyrinth, inside the labyrinth, I thought that was really cool. This three-dimensional, multi-layered labyrinth. It made everything feel more colossal. And it really did feel like a lot of it fit the theme of what it was trying to make. If they actually kept it consistent with the continuity, it would have fit in nicely. They would have had to make a few changes to the story, but they could have made it all fit nicely together. But I digress. The gameplay itself, they do give you a tutorial which you can take the time to learn, or learn through trial and error, which I ended up doing. And, you could do a lot of cool stuff. Those of us who are familiar with a lot of fusion combinations, classic combinations such as Red Eyes And Summon Skull obviously makes Black Skull Dragon, and Red Eyes and Meteor Dragon makes Meteor Black Dragon. Although, for some reason, Blue Eyes Ultimate has to be made through a ritual. And rituals had specific combinations required. A throwback to the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Prototype rules, where rituals would be somewhat similar to fusions in that they required specific combinations. Which made perfect sense. They required a specific combination of monsters, because it's a ritual. You know, classic... I liked how Magician of Black Chaos actually requires Dark Magician. I liked how there was a bit of a consistency there. He's obviously intended to be part of the family of Dark Magician, given that Dark Magician Girl gets a benefit from that. Anyways, I thought it was interesting how a lot of stuff, like, they adapted Yugioh well, because the draw system, Yugioh would be way too broken if it worked exactly the same as it did in normal Yu-Gi-Oh! Because if you just had to have all 5 cards in your hand, you could literally just tag the cards you don't want until you get all 5 pieces of Yugioh, and boom. You know, no work. You just win. Especially with the ability to move your life points on wheels. You know, a lot of cards were... Most of the game was designed very well. A lot of cards could be used to outmaneuver others. For example, Earthshaker was used to outmaneuver Labyrinth Terrain, and that Blazing Fiery card was designed to be able to clean all the terrain away. So that's a clever design. And I did like that. I thought it was very smart that they thought of using cards to counter cards. And Cannon Soldier and one other card does the same thing, I forget the name of it. Can actually move into Labyrinth Terrain and turn it into a normal one, effectively destroying it. That was handy, especially if you're facing the guy, Yugi's grandfather, who has Exodia in this. It was especially handy if you faced him. Toon terrain were particularly annoying, but they were fair, because, you know, toons are supposed to be powerful, exceptionally powerful compared to normal monsters. I found it kind of weird how some of the types were a little, you know, different. For example, Toon has their own monster type. They're not just Toon monsters as a subtype. They're Toons as their monster type. Like Summon Skull, Toon Summon Skull is not a fiend, he's a Toon. Just a Toon in general. And some vanilla monsters are also, you know, Toons for some reason. Like Parrot Dragon. I guess because they wanted to make the archetype more complete. Which made sense. Now, on to other, more critical views of the game. Certain cards were really unbalanced. Now, fortunately, most of these cards cannot be obtained legally in the game, meaning without cheat codes, in general situations, such as Ryuku, which you could only obtain through destiny draws, if legitimately. And of course, the game itself was smart enough to, you know, balance things out somewhat with the deck leader, the deck cost system, which has its flaws, and I'll get into that in a bit. But other cards, some cards like the Immortals especially, were a very flawed design, because the majority of them were above 1500 attack, and they had the unique ability to spawn Crush Terrain, which not only could they enter without dying, but they also got a bonus like every other, you know, positive card. So they had that unique advantage, which pretty much made them the most powerful archetype in the whole game. Slate Warrior being able to boost itself and every other immortal, as well as if it somehow managed to die by battle, which would almost certainly destroy whatever killed it. It was so broken. I mean, Slate Warrior and, being able to use Crush Terrain like that. The Immortal archetype was completely one of the most stupid things I've seen. Like, this could have been remedied by not making any of the monsters able to be, like, over 1500 or not significantly, but it felt broken that they, made it work like that. I feel like that could have been padded out differently. I did think it was cool how Crush Terrain existed as its own, thing. But I don't think having monsters that specifically benefit from that terrain would have been a good idea. It should have been like Labyrinth Terrain in the fact that, only certain monsters can cross over. Labyrinth Terrain was a cool idea, having only certain monsters be able to cross over. It was a barrier. It was an obstacle to either work around or be prepared to deal with. It was well designed, in other words. Field spells being terrain made sense in the context of the game, because the only field spells available were boosting field spells at the time. None of the field spells did what they do now. Field spells nowadays, if they do give a bonus and affect monsters, they also have some secondary effect that lets them search on top of it. It's not enough that they just boost your monster's attack, especially by something as small as 200 or 300. I'd argue that Duelist of the Roses actually improved on the field spells by making them more significant, the bonuses. The terrain was an improvement on field spells, given that it actually gave a more reasonable bonus. But at the same time, Crush Terrain, I think, was overall poorly handled, only because they had an entire archetype dedicated to creating it. Like, if there wasn't an entire archetype dedicated that could not only survive on it, but leave that behind, it wouldn't be so broken. Like, if, for example, the Immortal monsters actually died when they touched Crush Terrain, but could still spawn it after death, that would have actually been interesting. It's like, the disease can kill you, but you can leave the disease behind. Now, to talk about the deck cost system. This was their attempt to balance the game out. Now, this system would have been okay if you only needed it to progress through the game, but you could still later face those opponents without having to worry about deck cost. Or face them for fun. The problem with this system is it restricts a lot of what you can do. I mean, if you know how to obtain cards, or you know the game well enough, you can make a good deck easily. There's videos out there, but you have to keep in mind, back then, this information wasn't as easily accessible. You had to go to great lengths to figure out how Duelist of the Roses worked. You know? So, I'm just saying, I consider it a flaw, even at the time, just given the circumstances that the internet wasn't as big of a thing back when this game came out in North America, especially in Japan. So, overall, this is still considered a flaw, how many hidden rules there were in the game. The game had a lot of hidden rules. It was unnecessarily challenging to rank up your deck leader to gain special abilities. For some reason, it focused on how long you had your monster out, rather than that monster being the one that gave, like, the killing blow to the opponent's deck leader, something simple like that. The fusion combinations patterns were very undefined, and you'd have to look that stuff up to find out, or use immense trial and error. It was easy to accidentally fusion when you didn't want to. Like, you were just trying to bump aside a card so you could then equip it with something, and you could easily have wasted your entire hand. The draw system, I guess it made sense given the context of the game and the card pool they were using. It felt a little flawed. I did like the fact that, because the way the game worked with your deck leader, the game can easily take over, like, 20 turns. It made perfect sense that your deck leader, you couldn't deck out in this. Because it was too easy to deck out in Duelist of the Roses. Even with my modern rules, it's still easy. So I felt like that rule made sense as well. Overall, yeah, the hidden rules was a problem. The fact that you had to use graveyard slots or reincarnation, which required you to consecutively win or consecutively lose 5 games in a row in order to obtain new cards, was ridiculous. Especially because you couldn't even use graveyard slots to get every non-extra deck or monster that required special means to summon, like Blue Eyes Ultimate. You couldn't get all those. You couldn't get all those. Not everything but those that was in grave. It would have been okay if I couldn't get Blue Eyes Ultimate from the graveyard slots. That would have made sense. But it would have at least been nice to be able to get Blue Eyes White Dragon directly, rather than having to get Red Eyes graveyard slots to get Blue Eyes. Why was Blue Eyes so hard to obtain? You know, like, it wasn't even that good. I get it. It's the strongest vanilla monster, but considering you have a type that makes Crush Terrain that could easily destroy Blue Eyes, it doesn't even make that much of a difference when you think about it. Overall, I thought that the method of obtaining cards in the game was ridiculous. They give you codes to get special cards at the end, which makes sense. Although most people probably, who played this game and got frustrated, probably just used cheats, because, to be honest, the game was a bit busted at times. I don't think I required cheats to get through it, but that's because I had the benefit of immense trial and error. The game really has a lot of hidden rules in and of itself, and that's part of what makes the game so frustrating to many players. But there was a prestige of being someone who knew how to beat Duels of the Roses. Like, those who found, like, kids, when I was a kid, it was cool if you could beat that game, or you knew enough about it, or whatever. It was actually cool. I mean, the game itself managed to become a PS2 greatest hit, so obviously it was a commercial success. I'm just saying, though, overall, the game itself could have had a better system. Like, there should have been some in-game currency you win from each match that you can use to buy new cards, or even packs of cards would be slightly better. Because that's a better system in the games. I mean, the fact that you can't even just use codes from the cards to obtain cards in-game also is kind of stupid. I understand they were trying to be unique, but having an in-game vendor would have made things much simpler than having to, resort to trial and error, looking things up, or using cheats. If you usually have to do so much trial and error to figure a game out, that's usually a sign the game itself is pretty flawed. I mean, you should only have to do so much trial and error in any good game, generally speaking. But, you know what? Overall, I do think the game itself was... The concept would have worked. It would have been nice to have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Expanded universe, though, in general. Like, a lot of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games don't seem to keep continuity with the anime or manga. And this is probably because whoever writes these games is not the writer of the original source material. But it would have been nice if we had something like that going on. In general, it's nice if a franchise would make their games canon with whatever the show is. Like, they could easily take the idea of Duelist of the Roses and make it into an OVA or even a spin-off series if they wanted to. Like I said before in one of my videos. If they just changed things around, made the game easier to understand, and made sure all the rules in the game that, like, being able to find cards through your deck leader by having it over the right grid zone, if they had all the rules out in the open, the game itself had a better system for obtaining cards, and the deck cost system was slightly adjusted to accommodate, you know, when you've beaten that opponent already, you can just replay them regardless. And Immortals were redesigned similar to how I said before. The game itself would have been great. I think it would have held up a little better. Personally, I think if they were gonna remake it, they'd have to make at least those changes to make the game more palatable. If they were gonna reimagine the very basic idea of Duelist of the Roses, though, they would have to do a little better than that. In my opinion, if they wanted to make Duelist of the Roses into a modern game, with modern cards, with the card pool they have now, they would have to do something closer to my DOR style, or the modern format that Anti-Meta Man did, if they were going to introduce that. Or at least use a card pool that strictly uses only everything up to a certain era. They certainly could. And you know what? They wouldn't need an overly powerful device to do it either. Such a game could run off a mobile device. Not unlike Duel Links. Would Konami do this? Maybe. They're more likely to do a remake. They're less likely to do anything to improve it. But what I said before, like changing the Immortal types around so that they're not as broken, that they can't benefit from the Crush terrain directly, and making the game overall more clear, having access to all the information and rules of the game, maybe even through some kind of like in-game menu, would be nice. That would help. Just easily being able to say, okay, I know all this or whatever. And being able to have a better system for obtaining cards, either by improving the graveyard slots to have much better options, and changing the deck leader system to make it much easier to level up your deck leader throughout the ranks, more based on at least what deck leader you're using or what monsters you use to kill your opponent. Stuff like that would be a great improvement. I think if they were going to remake it, they could at least make the game slightly better. I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult, and if they have to remake it anyways, what's a few minor changes? If they have to reimagine the basic idea, then yes, they should take a more modern take on it. Especially if they're going to use any of the card pool of that. That was just my thoughts on the original Duelist of the Roses. I wanted to get those thoughts out there. I keep getting requests or hearing criticisms of my videos for not using the Duelist of the Roses style rules. So I thought I'd at least should make a video. For everyone, this has been NC Lord, and I thank you for watching.